Okay.
All right. All right. From Franconia, which is totally not just northern Bavaria, we have Mark, ladies and gentlemen. It is not Bavaria. From Emerald Triangle, the lost son of Bigfoot, and the grandson of the first bong maker, James. I have no descriptions. What did you hear? The what people? The leaf people?
I'll take it. I want to get I said we're a proud people, but I want to get some of that family money, you know?
Yeah. Talk about a police oppression of like a completely white section of country. I mean, the hell they fucking rained down on those poor people. Anyways, okay. Oh no. This thing has jumbled up on my everything I underlined. All right, where were we? Okay, colonial. What page is this? On your
I think we were on page 85.
No, that's right. Yeah.
Population decline, economic crisis, and the disciplining of women.
Yes, sir. I should have just used his. Okay. Yeah, you go ahead. You want to start it up?
No, because I don't remember what's going on.
Yeah, me too. So last time we were
a fix of ambiguity now in my head. And Hegel. Because I really like that first chapter, and that's why I wanted to do it after this, because I do want to have a lot to say about that very first section. I think. I want to go back.
I was very surprised. Like again, he was like, "Okay, got to read some of these stuff that you have in this pile." But yeah, the section after that is amazing too, and then it's all just fascinating, even though it's a long rant and you can't really take notes on it. I mean, there are arguments in there, and it's very clear, even though it's very abstract. Yeah, it's very fantastic, and I'm kind of sad that I didn't read more of her existentialist work. Come on, please don't be like this. Is this section colonialization, globalization, and women? Is that before or after? Oh, way after.
I think it's Okay. Yeah, in this section we're on, what's happening is, so less than a century after Columbus landing on the American continent, so 1592-ish, it's talking about this waves of death from disease, both in the Americas and in Europe.
Yeah, it says here, according to David Stannard, who probably wrote something in 1992, in the century after the conquest, the population declined by 75 million across South America, representing 95% of its inhabitants. And this, of course, also took place in the United States, and we're already talking about that. Almost upon arrival, a huge decimation of these local politics, and we were kind of talking about these. She talks a lot about, in last time, if I remember, a lot of this bioethics, this idea of that. Okay, so now the rural is part of the matrix of the urban because of these shifts that are happening in these two localities, which is kind of sending populations across. So there's this circulation of people, and this circulation of people keeps getting caught in these kind of systems of oppression, be it in the cottage system or the developing kind of industries. well, not in industrial development. It was like the artisans control and the people who were kind of in control of the markets. And then the last thing I remember we talked about, which is why we stopped, we wanted to go into this, was exactly how that applied to the subjugation of women, if you will. They just got the losing kind of end of the bargain in this development. More so than men, in a sense that, yes, we've, in this history that we're, specific histories that we're looking at in Europe, you had these, they are of course hierarchies, and they've been there, but suddenly you have this hierarchy that is very much not just a separation of labor, but it materially puts women under the subjugation of men who are themselves subjects of power in these social dynamics. So there is suddenly like a more of a tier happening. So that's kind of my abstract, general, frameworks of it. And yeah, these movements, we said this last time, there is this kind of increase in the application of discipline at work, because you're talking about small groups of people or individuals. It diffuses these social protests. There's more movement. There's more control of these forces of workers. And then there's like this fixity to job, right? Suddenly, because you're seeing kind of the development of how wages are conducted, but they're different than the artisan or something, right? And this kind of recalls sections from Wealth of Nations, right? Oh, the guy who's condemned to making like needles, and Adam Smith is like, okay, this person is efficient, it's going, but you're also killing his soul because he's like tethered to this just a dumbass process. Okay, yeah, and so that's kind of where we are in this. And then there's connection again to this population decline is a lack of production.
Yeah, she's saying that in the beginning, she's saying that the population decline, the economic crisis, and the relations of labor created the conditions for form the what she calls the biopower regime.
Yeah,
because you have this source, your labor force is starting to decline. You need to kind of institute some things. Why exactly it came out in that hierarchy you were talking about is kind of what she's describing in the book.
Which is also specifically talking about like just talking in opposition to Foucaultian framework, where Foucault is espousing something like biopower that's a little bit more from nowhere than she's trying to say. She's trying to say that, like, the biopower regime borrowed from already strong institutions of social disciplining, and the witch hunts, for example, which are already extant at this time, have been used efficiently to discipline the population down from its state of high real wage to a very low ability to care for itself and reproduce itself, which has led to the population making, like, I have some issues with the rational choice theory framework of it all, but led to the population making many more choices to not have children because they can't afford it. And so in effect, this is like capitalism recognizing one of its first externalities, that when you discipline and punish a population to enough of a degree, they stop reproducing themselves. So now you need to bring in something else to counter that, which is like a strength of capitalism because it can create a new industry to counter it can create a new industry to counter its own negative, and that can become a growth industry. And so we have a growth industry that emerges, which is the disciplining of women through biopower laws and further intensification of the witch hunts. And but now, instead of with the purpose of breaking up the rebellions, it's with the purpose of separating the women from the men within the rebellions to make women pure reproductive capacity and make men pure productive capacity.
Yeah, no, that's very good. Yeah, and I have this kind of, she makes it a point to it's very important, like that that divergence from Foucault, right? I mean, just to return to kind of the beginning, what you were saying there, you know, and I was thinking about this. I was trying to say, like, what is the essence of this disagreement, right? So I was thinking how, like, Foucault's biopower is couched in this that larger project of excavating kind of neoliberalism, but he mainly did focus on these kind of big shifts, right? Which was like the devastation, which brings this need, among other things, for biopower, and then of course he's not really making these distinctions. What she wants to make is that, like you're saying, okay, so devastation, somewhat oppression, makes these populations so docile that, you know, even with the rational choice element in there, let's keep that in there for a while, that, okay, this is not worth it, like I'm just gonna die, or I can't afford to be a productive part of this system. And she wants to say that no, there is something more sinister and deliberate is happening, which is, you see that, of course, the prosecution of the witches is then woven into codification of sexual activities, right? And you're also seeing like the disappearance and the illegality of like certain occupations, such as prostitution and stuff, and women and children and old men don't follow armies around anymore. Of course, armies are becoming more professionalized, and by the time of French Revolution, you just have this new thing, which is a standing army of people of your nation doing dick all. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think what she's doing is this. What makes it more like violent or forceful, or seemingly so at least, is that instead of the interpretation you were talking about, Mark, where it comes from nowhere, it's having to destroy this already existing system of knowledge that women have, or system of a network around reproduction.
yeah,
And also kept thinking, giving Foucault a more material basis,
yeah,
beginning with the people, beginning with the class,
yeah.
in a
On the
Marxist sort of way.
bottom of page 86, it says, it's my contention that it was the population crisis of the 16th and 17th century, not the end of famine in Europe in the 18th, as Foucault has argued, that turn reproduction and population growth into state matters. So yeah, I mean, it's sort of Foucault's one of the parts that's confusing in Foucault is that, you know, he rests a lot on the Treaty of Westphalia. He rests a lot on the international religious wars, and this sort of process of empire. And there's definitely something to be said about, like, Foucault's not saying that it's really from nowhere, but he is saying that someone like managed to plumb the depths of the arcana in order to pick out these like little strands of history and weave them together into a seemingly new project. And that makes it a bit more like witchcraft than what Federici is expressing, is know that this is a process that, far from emerging spontaneously from the end of famine in the 18th century, it's something that wove together over the course of centuries from already strong, nearly hegemonic forces in European society.
Yeah, and that makes me think it's really even more non-Foucauldian than she might think, because with Foucault, he wants to say that it could have gone another way. But you're right, if it's these long, slow, gradual processes that work, how do you change that? What point in time is where you kind of go back in time and say, do this other thing? You know, where's the assassination of the Archduke in these moments?
Right.
And does Foucault really need that for it to work? Or
Yeah, I'm almost trying to recall what was his name? I think he taught at Duke, analytic philosopher, breaking the spell. What was his name? Dan
Daniel
Dennett.
Dennett? Yeah.
You know, in his kind of spar with the likes of Sam Harris and stuff, you know, the what was the gist of his argument against determinism, that something
Could have done otherwise, is the phrase they usually use.
yeah, but he just has to you know, in order to go to soft determinism, he's like inevitability, you know, he intrudes that, yeah, something's determinative, but is the result inevitable or something? And I can't remember the full argument to present it here, but anyways, there is you know, there is, of course, she's saying it. She keeps saying that, yes, things could have been otherwise, right? And for things to be otherwise, you have to be like, no, people made choices, right? People are not Skinner's pigeons here, right?
And she
Yeah.
describes a lot of these anti-feudal struggles like by, you know,
Yeah, all the
conflict, class
time.
conflict.
Right. Yeah. That's very true. Yeah, I just, Foucault, not interested in that. I just don't think. Yeah, which is another reason that's not there. Yeah, and then I'm looking at this line. It's I guess mentioned saying, we're saying that from 16th century, mid 16th century onward, it seems like the greatness of the polity rests on its population. And that, I guess, that fact doesn't need that much elaboration, because, well, the urban is becoming the center of developments, and outside there is appropriation going on, enclosures. Some forms of living are just dying out, like feudalism, and then okay, and we are seeing the development of antagonism between the feudal aristocrats and the new bourgeois who are after their land, of course. Yeah, so I guess I put down here some more themes that are going on, and feel free to take the wheels from it. There's a proliferation of mercantilism. There's a population explosion, especially in the urban setting, and then there's a codification of reproduction into criminal codes and other sexual activities. Um, oh yeah, and I don't know if we touched on this before, and then there is also the sexual behavior and reproductions are codified, follows with it a woman who becomes a legal subject now as a genus of its own. And suddenly you have women coming into court or being called into court. Um, and I guess there's that kind of ambiguity there too, right? I mean, like the once you're imbued with rights or you become the bearer of rights, of course you become a right bearer of some sort, but you also become condemnable or more into the kind of system of regulation.
Yeah, and we see increasing women being tried for infanticide and abortion being criminalized. I also wanted to point out too, in this time we see like the family become a focus or a center. And it made me think of, was it Marx and Hegel talks about this too, where the family is like the training ground to learn about civil society before they go out. So they kind of learn what their function will be. You know, women are plants, as Hegel said, and
Right, yeah.
boys are Napoleon, whatever.
Yeah, there is a there, and I remember I was talking about this. There is kind of a outsourcing of discipline to the private, which is kind of a bullshit distinction, because like if a variance of proto states like technologies of discipline are reaching into the private, I don't know like if the distinction itself is meaningful at all. Nevertheless, because here you read, sorry, I don't have page numbers here, but this paragraph starts with the marginalization.
89.
Oh, sorry, what was it?
Page 89.
89. She says with the and you already, James, you already mentioned the part before this about infanticide and witchcraft. The marginalization of the midwife, the process began which women lost the control they had exercise over procreation, which James just mentioned about the kind of bodies of knowledge that socially was present among women, and were reduced to a passive role in child delivery, while male doctors came to be seen as the true givers of life, as in the alchemical dreams of the Renaissance magicians. With this shift, a new medical practice also prevailed, one that in the case of medical emergency prioritized the life of the fetus over that of the mother. I'm glad we're back there again. This was in contrast to the customary birthing process which women had controlled. And by the way, even the Irish are going the other way. And you have like Catholic, like South American countries that are also legalizing abortion. Anyways, and indeed, for it to happen, the community of women that had gathered around the bed of the future mother had to be first expelled from the delivery room, and midwives had to be placed under the surveillance of the doctor or had to be recruited to police women. There's no citation here, but I mean, she's kind of describing a general change in practices that more or less ring true. I mean, the medical profession, I wouldn't be surprised if the women's care is still like dominated by men. And then nursing is kept for as you know the designated
well, I know at least there's still marginalization of like midwifery and doulas and maybe alternative-ish practice, but that might even be just language used to kind of marginalize it further, to say that it's alternative. Or maybe traditional kind of birthing practices are still I think, marginalized in the medical profession.
Yeah, there was a very good article on this recently. I'll try to find it again. I mean, it's a difficult. I mean, again, you're asking, like, if you as one would ask, like, if this system that in its content is presenting another phenomena in the history, has the whole, like, the same form behind it. I guess what I'm trying to say is that, like, midwifery, like, today, it's become, it's a kind of a specific in America, right? It's also a signifier of a lifestyle,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, granola-y, hippie, yuppie-ish.
Right. And then there's, like, myths kind of woven into it about kind of natural birthing, or like sitting up and not sitting down. And I guess I'm saying all of this is, sometimes you wonder if there's, like, not actual legitimate medical concerns for systematizing the process, but yet you can still retain the critique that, okay, justified or not, it's still it's still kind of practiced in a sexist way, or I don't know.
Mhm. Yeah, I don't think it has to be necessarily kind of like conflicting means, like science-based, or this kind of traditional, more, I don't know what I want to say, based on these kind of traditional practices. You could integrate them.
Yeah,
I think, as long as your goal is protection of the Hippocratic oath,
sure.
do no harm.
My understanding is that they are integrated, but they're integrated one directionally, as in the medical establishment does not integrate midwifery. The midwifery does integrate OBGYNs as part of their practice.
Yeah,
And it becomes, for class reasons, it becomes a signifier of class. And that's, like, sounds more circular than I mean, just that, like, your insurance ain't paying for midwifery. Or if it is, it's certainly not telling you that it does. And it's not telling you, it's not like making it possible for you to have a 3-person midwife team.
right.
Yeah, and it's very individualized and personal. You're not having the community of women around you.
Right. And that is primarily what birth doulas and midwives bring, is the notion of, instead of coming in for a 6-week checkup and a 6-month checkup and then a birth, and I see you 3 times before, I help you bring a baby into life and hopefully don't kill you in the process. The job is centered around care from as soon as you find out you're pregnant until after birth as well, education. And I think it's a more integrated practice, which I think is the appeal, regardless of the anti-science distinctions, or if there are any ways in which midwifery is failing would-be parents. I'm not aware of those, but they might exist.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's and not to get hang up on this, I just think there's kind of more to say on it. Let me see. I've kind of been in the past couple of years, kind of had 2 midwives in my life. One was medically trained, one was certified but trained in alternative ways, and they were both in amid these persons in Alaska. But there is like, among most of Native populations, especially when it comes with police and medical procedures, right? There is this intense distrust, like just like to a point of being problematic for the community itself because of that history, whatnot. But it's not rare. It is not rare to hear. I almost want to call it like the Native kind of prodigal person, right? That is like, okay, I lived in the mainland. I've lived outside of these communities. I lived outside of reservations. And in like a later age, I'm finding this and coming back to it. There is this, it's more intense in my experience with those people. But the language that is articulated is that hey, we have witch doctors here, they do this A, B, C, D, and they call the medical services Western, even though they're people from here and there's stuff like that. And then I guess to me, like you're talking to like nurses, right? You're like a person is who has been raped, right? Like that medical person like has to, in order for this process to go through, they have to question you, they have to examine you. It's horrible, but it's just like they come, they don't talk to us, it's like, hey, yes, this bad thing just happened to me, but like, I don't trust you, give me a Native person. Of course, the solution would be to build these communities where, these fucking problems don't exist. Like James and you were mentioning earlier, it's like, well, if our medical system would account for midwifery, then we wouldn't have these discrepancies. But nevertheless, I think that reactionary ideology that these discrepancies create are a lot more harmful to the people who are trying to resist them.
Yeah.
I mean, on the other side is just cash money. I mean, like
Yeah.
Long-winded, but
I mean, like IHS is wildly underfunded, and that would be like a good start to this problem. That like the departure of analysis has to come from the medical establishment only ever wants to look at the interaction site of the person refusing care from the Western practitioner, instead of the the failure is already imminent. At that point, that person is just choosing which kind of failure do they engage in. Are they going to like decline care? That's the kind of failure they're going to get.
Yeah.
Or are they going to, are they going to accept care? And that's the kind of failure they're going to get, right? Because there's no trust established. And, this is like the most important part of Marx, I think, is the emphasis on intergenerationality that underpins everything. Of like, these aren't problems we solve today. These are problems. And this goes back to the earlier thing about the witch hunts being a decision or not, or was it inevitable, is that there are ways to make these choices, but they require really, really long and consistent applications of that decision. So they just don't go away.
Yeah.
And I think the emphasis, or I want to make the emphasis, like these interconnected processes with the kind of, the breaking up of the commons and all these other things on, and people going to cities, breaking apart that communal aspect of life that was so prevalent among the class then, and culminating in neoliberalism today. And I wanted to say too, some points about the science, as a former skeptic, sciencey, talking about pseudoscience and alternative medicine and stuff. I think the perspective there is an arrogant perspective to think that things like traditional birthing methods or traditional medicine were just kind of they were making do with what they had, and anything better they should accept. They should have accepted the science from the colonialists. They don't say this, but I think this kind of underlies their thinking.
Sure.
But I think that there's the problem though that comes up is there was a break in a lot of these knowledges. So people now, like the kind of rich white ladies trying to do traditional birthing, they're picking up a kind of edge of the real knowledge that's being sold to them by some charlatan, probably.
Yeah, I mean, the trend was
From Goop
bubbling
or something.
about 20 years ago. Yeah, but it was, that morning show hostess Jenny who made that documentary when who was a celebrity, but she made this documentary when she gives birth in their tub, and that was like really kind of like bring the thing to the surface, and then became a lifestyle.
Sure.
But yeah, anyways, we don't have to talk about every aspects of it. I just I don't know. I just thought to bring it up, but yeah.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to talk about
please.
is the sort of
Yeah.
the biopower genesis aspect of all this is that that paragraph you read, Sean, with the marginalization of the midwife, the process began by which women lost the control they had exercised over procreation and were reduced to a passive role in child delivery, while male doctors came to be seen as the true givers of life. The other part about this is that this was largely like not strictly state sponsored. This particular change in this particular industry. This was this notion of like one of the first parts of contemporary history of an industry, quote unquote, professionalizing itself, by which it meant marginalizing the women practitioners, accelerating a certain kind of, sort of like feminist historical critiques would call it like an androcentric knowledge model of how to do medicine. And the legacy of that is alive today very well with the ways in which doctors continue to distrust the veracity of women self-reporting their level of pain, or the fact that just like some of the different, like I'm not on point with dates, so I don't want to throw out statistics right now, but some of the ways in which women's biological structures are not mapped until very recently in history, because they're just not a concern. Nobody cares,
Yeah, right. And then there's like a history of autopsy, which is like connected to the bodies of like foreign, like the bodies they could get. So then, most definitely.
Yeah, there's a rich literature scholarship out there about feminist critique of the medical complex.
Yeah, look, I kind of, I say this every day. I mean, again, to reference Shirley Geiger, like, well, I've quite a, I left Shirley with a good reading list, which I'm still working on. But the most important one was not a philosophy book. It was Natalie Angier's Woman in Intimate Geography, which, like Shirley, I try to buy from many people. Then these two medical students wrote this one a couple of years ago, which was called The Wonder Down There. And they're Australian. And so the whole book is about, like, they were like, hey, we're med students. We talk to women. Like, most women don't know anything about their body. So we wrote a book about just what is a vagina and how does it work and all these like other organs around it. And I got that book too, but it's and those two books always remind me of Eve Ensler, you know, when she was talking about like why she wrote Vagina Monologue. She was talking about, you know, a lot of women that would come to my workshops, and you know, they're sitting down, and I give them a mirror to be able to look at their own vagina, and a lot of these women have not done this ever. Like, this is the first time they're seeing it. So just put aside like understanding it, understanding your own body, its mechanics, how it functions, blah 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 blah. I guess, you know, we're coming about, you know, these moments that I get hung up on, that look, regardless of, you know, if this thing happened overnight or it was like a cultural shift that was, you know, tracking the material shift over 200-300 years, nevertheless, we see artifacts of those changes today, right? And the fact that, you know, you live in the richest, most powerful empire in the world, and a lot of women, and I'm sure men too, but here we're talking about, are ignorant about their own bodies. Like, that tells you something, right? That like that kind of a glaring gulf within a pocket of population's knowledge about themselves are indicative of certain mechanisms. Unless you want to say, oh, it's a coincidence, you know, unless you want to just be like, look, vagina is not, you know, protruding like a penis, so it's hard to know it or something. I guess that would be like the most absurd.
Yeah, because it's really, you know, the idea is we're not like animals. We're not, you know, like my dog will get really intimate with her own kind of downstairs. Humans are supposed to, we put clothes on, we kind of separate ourselves from that. We, you know, are disgusted by displays of it. It's mystified, you know.
It's fetishized, sure.
Yeah. And there's more Foucault, the history of sexuality. It's repressed, but then somehow kind of inflamed at the same time.
Yeah, as a kind of as a way to liberation. Yeah. Speaking of vaginas, I'm going to move to Marx here, unless you guys have any.
I was going to move to that too, because she got a couple pages after where she's talking about like Adam Smith.
One callback I wanted to say is on page 31, the section, just a reference to this part. 16 female doctors, among them several Jewish women, specialized in surgery or eye therapy, were hired in the 14th century by the municipality of Frankfurt, which, like other city administrations, offered its population a system of public health care. Female doctors, as well as midwives or sage-femme, were dominant in obstetrics, either in the pay of city governments or supporting themselves with the compensation they received from their patients. After the cesarean cut was introduced in the 13th century, female obstetrics were the only ones who practiced it. This is like 100, let's see, where are we at? This is 200 to 250 years before, in the same regions that will later become totally dominated by men doctors. So please continue on to Marx.
Okay, I need to reread that part.
But yeah, the Marx. At the paragraph that starts this aspect of primitive accumulation.
That's exactly what I
wanted to read the last part of it. But at this point, the population is starting to grow again. And she said, well, I don't know where to start, but like Adam Smith.
Let's start from this aspect. The
whole thing. Okay. This aspect of primitive accumulation is absent in Marx's analysis, except for his remarks in the Communist Manifesto on the use of women within the bourgeois family as producers of heirs, guaranteeing the transmission of family property. Marx never acknowledged that procreation could become a terrain of exploitation, and by the same token, a terrain of resistance. He never imagined that women could refuse to reproduce or that such a refusal could become part of class struggle. In the Grundrisse, 1973, yeah, whatever. He argued that capitalist development proceeds irrespective of population numbers because, by virtue of the increasing productivity of labor, the labor that capital exploits constantly diminishes in relation to constant capital, that is, the capital invested in machinery and other production assets. With the consequent determination of a surplus population, but this dynamic, which Marx defines as the law of population typical of the capitalist mode of production, could only prevail if procreation were a purely biological process or an activity responding automatically to economic change, and if capital and the state did not need to worry about, quote, women going on strike against child making. This is in fact what Marx assumed. He acknowledged that capitalist development has been accompanied by an increase in population, of which he occasionally discussed the causes. But like Adam Smith, he saw this increase as a natural effect of economic development. And in Capital Volume 1, he repeatedly contrasted the determination of a surplus population with the population's natural increase. Why procreation should be a force of a fact of nature rather than a social, historically determined activity invested by diverse interests and power relations is a question Marx did not ask. Nor did he imagine that men and women might have different interests with respect to child making, an activity which he treated as a gender neutral, undifferentiated process.
Yeah.
So Marx reifies, in a way, child making, she's saying. It makes it ideological instead of
I mean,
his own analysis, his own brand.
I mean, okay, so what, you know, I guess the way you would, like, I understood Marx, like when of course he's not one to naturalize any, you know, the man never fucking used the world humankind, right? I mean, the idea is that natural, as in natural result of coercive dynamics within production and creation of value. And I just wonder, you know, I give that she's, you know, her point is more nuanced and focused, where Marx, you know, in Capital One, she's talking about, of course, focuses on these issues. She definitely focuses on women and children, but reproduction is out of it. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's I fail to see the actual difference here. Maybe I don't.
Yeah, I think that it's an omission in Marx, one which there's lots of reasons why he might have missed it, not
Sure.
cared, not noticed, thought it was less relevant than it is. I think it's relevant. I think it's important. I think Federici's point here and many other Marxist feminist points are salient. But ultimately, I think it's not a critique of Marxism, or it's not a critique of Marx as it is as much as it is a critique of dogmatic Marxists.
I think it's more of a fixing of Marx, almost. Marx just come from, well, they just comment, we don't worry about that, it's natural, or he didn't get to it, or he omitted it for not thinking about it.
He just connects it to that formula, right? And which is that, okay, as productivity goes up, there is a diminishment of labor. I mean, labor becomes more intense, you need less of it, right? And that in relation to the dead capital that is in the machinery and this productivity, you know, of course, creating a certain consumer society, which is itself part of this productive force. You know, at the time Marx was writing, like in Germany and even England, you were talking about like 20-30% of the population, or even less at points, like 15%. So I understand it's not a, again, not something you can hang up on. I just wonder, like, if you could have those both, you could have the both propositions at the same time, that look, there is a natural increase, but let me show you like the actual, like how these coerciveness like manifested in A, B, C in these situations. I guess that's what I'm saying, because I mean, it would be weird to, for England to appropriate, just the wealth of the world and not see population boom at home. I mean, regardless of if there is discipline or not.
Well, I think it's more that the England's ability to appropriate the population of the world, or the wealth of the world, is a consequence of its wealth of population.
Most of that wealth we know is not going to the working class people.
That's true. That's true, but that's how you have like a debt society very early on. I mean, because everything is like the opportunity towards wealth, not actual. Yeah, I don't know.
But
Yeah.
it's kind of, it makes me think of somewhere in Marx, I think volume 1 talks about the house falling down, and there's all these causes, but gravity is going to be the thing that pulls it down. Rotting wood might help, and all these other things.
Right.
Because you see the need the capitalist class for more workers. Oh, then just by chance we have this natural increase. That's very fortuitous to us, good thing. But to say where the exact cause is,
Right.
really, I don't think is that important necessarily. But I do think, but I think it is maybe for Federici, because he's trying to say like this kind of disciplining of women was central to the kind of formation of capitalism.
Which is also trying to say, like, from page 86, right? We have the complaints and ministers who from the pulpit charged the youth did not marry and procreate in order not to bring more mouths into the world they could feed. And that's in the early 16th century, I think. So like we do know that capitalism and imperialism at large in its different sort of like arms is very willing to, I'm not trying to say they're the same thing, just that they share this structure. They're very willing to like take advantage of an organically arising thing to sort of mutate its manifestations and turn it into a form of power. So it certainly could be just happenstance, but I think I don't necessarily see that Federici is trying to disagree that there's a reinforcement where when you plunder the world, and where was this? It's in that graph section, page 78.
Yeah, I wonder, she's tracking like population stuff like that.
The price revolution triggered a historic collapse of the real wage. Within a few decades, the real wage from 1480. Within a few decades, the real wage lost 2/3 of its purchasing power. It did not return to the level it had reached in the 15th century until the 19th century. Right. So it didn't do that because the working class took back a larger share of the real wage. It did that because of the absolute value of the market tripled, quadrupled, quintupled, right?
Yeah.
That the and this is specifically in Southern England, like is the top graph that she has there. Once England had, stolen and plundered huge portions of the world, then the scraps at the bottom were just bigger scraps. And so of course that is going to lead to some population growth.
Right.
Yeah, maybe it was a kind of snowball effect and they helped push it along. Once it started growing, they need more workers, continue growing.
Yeah.
More wealth, under more.
Now we have so many workers, we'll start shipping them overseas to different penal colonies and plantation
Right.
colonies.
Right, and then of course the exportation of the criminals to
Mhm.
well, United States and Australia. Yeah, so so this leads to what I put here as devaluation of women's labor. Oh, did I miss women, the new commons and substitutes for? No, I have not. Okay.
You're right at the section.
Okay.
So
So I wrote here. So we were going into an era of privatization and financialization again, or rather, we've been there. We're just seeing you trying to evolve in different ways. Sorry, did you say something, James?
No.
Oh, okay. Are so here. So here's some of the results. Again, the dislocation of women, the disappearance and pushback against women's participation within to kind of establish or traditional places in their respective societies across Europe. There's an increased association between gender, labor, and other spheres of society, like private and public. But the introduction of women as subject in society, I feel like for Federici is part of biopolitics. I mean, it's a regulated import of sort, and yeah, I don't have any notes on that until patriarchy of the wage, which I think what this section is saying.
yeah, I don't have any notes on that, but I'm reading the first sentence of that now because we were
Yeah,
just
please.
talking about how important this role, this domination of reproduction was. She says, she writes, the criminalization of women's control over procreation is a phenomenon whose importance cannot be overemphasized, both from the viewpoint of its effects on women and its consequences for the capitalist organization of work.
There you go.
Yeah, I think that the part that makes biopolitics powerful is that it is fundamentally, my assessment is that it's an efficiency ethic, but it's an efficiency of like how to change a mind or how to change a society, how to change a polity or something like that. It's how to do the minimum thing and get as many positive, whatever you define as positive. It's very mechanistic in the sense of society is a machine for doing whatever the people in control of it want it to do. And how do you get closer to the outcomes that you want, and how do you put as little in as you can to get there? And so this is one of the ways that this book is important, but especially this section saying like control over contraception is a very, very small amount of power required to intervene, but you get a very large output, very large change in society from it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And maybe think of what Sean said earlier about Adam Smith and the soul. All these processes are to kind of squeeze that soul out, or just get it out of the way and long enough to get some productivity out of the worker, some surplus value.
Yeah, I think that's we should definitely. I need to read that book. I sent you the article about accounting slavery, and that she's suggesting that that all the processes of management of workers today in the United States are developed. It's not a theoretical work. She's a sociologist.
I took one industrial organizational psychology class at PSU, and I know that already. Just from
Oh,
the
okay.
class.
Just wanted to show you the graphs then.
Okay. And this
What was I gonna say? I need to stop getting high on this show. Yeah. So one point I guess I wanted to say is I think you just need to say it, even though everyone knows it. It's out there. Like when you see controversies in America today in relation to law about contraceptive, you have to understand that that's a shorthand. Like I'm saying that to you straight from law school. Like that is shorthand for control over women, not control over women's body, not religious conceptions of life, not philosophical disagreements. There is a clear and present and articulated intention on half of this country that you control women through their reproductive capacities, right? That we have gone too far because of that decision. And by the way, you don't have to like between men and women. Unfortunately, within women, like Roe v. Wade is still very hasn't gained that much popularity since it was bad. But anyway, so that's what we were talking about. And I 100% when Federici says it here, I don't even need the demonstrations, even though I'm grateful for it. 100%. Like reproductive control, clear, not a conspiracy. If you don't believe it, read a book. I had a second point I wanted to make that I totally forgot, which is like more important. I feel like that's why I stretched this one.
Yeah. I mean, some part of that is that the chilling effect is more important than the direct effect. Like making this person have this child is not the important part.
This is a threat.
Right. It's a threat. And I would say that I don't know from a legal perspective what the framework is on it, but I would say from the sociological perspective, it's as much about control of men as it is about control of women, because it's another implied threat of support, or you will be treated like women.
Yeah, and this is my question, and I'm also like trying to use something for this paper. I'm writing this paper. It's just like the early Soviet jurisprudence, right? Like from 1970 until 1927 or something. Just it's very specialized, very kind of close look. And there's this huge debate they're having, right? And these just some of the smartest shit I've ever read, some of the most inspiring projects I've ever read, like creating law schools where these law students were being taught how to end law, how to deconstruct societies. Like Soviet Union, I was talking to my friend, like those first 20 years are like one of the most exciting 20 years of human history that, in my eyes, to a person like me, because you have very smart people, very smart society actually engaging in material change of the world, and all of that goes on. But here's the part that is relevant to this reading, as you guys were talking about. Like one question that these guys have is that, is the development of the law because of instrumentalism, or is it an ontological development? And what does that mean? Again, these are like practical people. So this is not just like who are very antagonistic to ideologialism and Kant and neo-Kantian and all that stuff. So the idea is that, like, look, is law merely an instrument of the state for the propagation of a type of society that makes it subservient to capitalism? That's the word instrument. And then there's an ontological one that, hey man, no, there is like underlying logics between these things that based on their own dynamics within the materialist kind of merging of the consciousness and the world, kind of progress towards history is more, it's got a little bit of, well, it's straddling Hegel, right? But nevertheless, they never solved this issue. Their movement dies. But now I have these questions here. Is like, what is she implying? I mean, you can have, like I'm totally okay with the dialectic of, having the equal rights, present themselves, and kind of eat it too. There's a lot of deliberative engagement, conspiratorial engagement in history, which I wouldn't put it past her, because we've seen our own lifestyle. Not put past her, past history, i.e., I'm not saying that instrumentalist theories of history and sociology are wrong. No, they can be very right. But what I can't say is that, like, is she committing to that, or is she more to the ontological one, which I think is where, that's how I always read Marx, but I read Marx as the young Marx, because I read Marx through Zizek, who's reading Marx through Hegel, blah 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 blah. Yeah, I'm trying to say, like, every time we see, like, oh, this change happened, is there that much human will? Like, how are we thinking about that? It's just really
How important is the legalistic structure to the question? Because I don't think that Federici is bound or even cares whether this comes through a formal law or just a shift in public policy, or, if it's a lynch mob or an inquisition burning the women's bodies. I don't think she particularly cares, because there's an organization to it either way. So
yeah, like, you can say that, but I think, like, look, you can say that the form of wage takes the shape of debt, right? Like a very kind of Soviet way of thinking that, oh, of course, bourgeoisie laws do that. You don't need any bourgeoisie to knowingly believe any of this, because certain economic relations create concepts that then overlap in other spheres of life, because spheres of life are not as separate, right? Like, so your subjectivity at work can also take subjectivities that you would take at law, like being accused or having a loan, which is like, having to reciprocate some kind of value, blah, 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 blah. Or you can be like, no, there was a clear purpose articulated. But yes, like you're saying, both of those can be true. None of those can be true. I mean, they did, because there's nothing necessitating an explanation. But I guess that when I'm reading here, I'm always like oscillating, because I'm shocked, man. I don't know. I'm still shocked.
Yeah.
By
I don't know where to put her on that, like, at least in historical terms, much less legal terms. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm inclined to think that, in the case of the economic argument, that it's a funneling towards debt, right? That that the structures are such that enough people will end up in debt that it has that overall shape, but the people who don't end up in debt are the people who exist to if it just funneled everyone there, then it would be too horrific and people would tear it down. So it needs to be a leaky funnel or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Like cutting off of other options. You have free choice, but you're kind of on a pathway surrounded by giant walls, and there's something pushing this way. Yeah,
right. You're like being extruded through the system in a brutalistic mechanism, because, like, you're not there is no one aware that you exist in it. I mean, I think that's like Simmel's point or something like that. But then I think, you know, with the case of the witch hunts, for example, you know, I think she'd probably have a similar take to the like Jim Crow era racial violence, lynch mobs and such things, that's not strictly state sponsored, rarely anyways in the country.
Yeah.
It doesn't change that it's like wildly formalized and heavily in the interest of maintaining a certain structure of law and order.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm thinking of Foucault there, like he would kind of make that same point too, right?
Yeah. Right. I mean, yes, the warden that takes in a certain group at a particular epoch that is a transitional one is not saying that. I mean, he's thinking, he's okay, I'm going to make you better, but he's not aware that he's within a certain ideological genealogy. But then there is also things that are necessitate him, i.e., you studied these things through these institutions because you were in this class. But yeah, I mean, yeah, sure, that can be true. I mean, that like I'm just trying to like balance it. So yeah. We should also plug in Adolph Reed's book. He just wrote one on Jim Crow. It's one of those first account books. I'm so excited. Like when fucking Adolph Reed writes book. So I'm plugging a book I've never even haven't read, but
Perfect.
Mark used a good example because he was talking about this. You know, he was like, you know, there was this because he grew up in the South doing Jim Crow, you know, and he's so grievant that like there's like the Black Marxism has died, and he has to, you know, they call Ta-Nehisi Coates before they call him, you know, that's kind of but no, he was saying that like there was a clear economic goals that were established through, like you're saying, law and order, right? I'm actually like in the land use class right now. We're talking about racial zoning, of course, very de jure, right? I mean, like very deliberate, you know,
Right.
like, hey, we don't want to have we don't want to live with these blacks in our neighborhood because we work at the same plant, right? And you have interest, got people. Anyways, and The Color of Law, folks, is a great book about that. I'm the weed really hit. You guys have to stop me. Like just. I'm not high, but you know, like that initial like excitement.
Yeah. I'd like to read more some Adolph Reed.
I don't want kind of Adolph you want to read, James.
Yeah, not the
You're the only person that ordered
I'm trying to
like
think of
those.
another. I'm trying to think of a third Adolph that I
No. You're like, yeah, a dolphin.
Yeah, I wanted to point to. Yeah, I think you said. Yeah, I didn't really highlight much in that section after that, except one thing about on page 95 above the picture on my version, the end of the paragraph from the page before. She writes, we can thus connect the banning of prostitution and the expulsion of women from the organized workplace with the creation of the housewife and the reconstruction of the family as the locus for the production of labor power. However, from a theoretical and political viewpoint, the fundamental question is under what conditions such degradation was possible, what social forces promoted it or were complicitous with it. So
Yeah.
what I was mentioning before, and kind of really what we were talking about.
Yeah. This is reminding me of reading about the Freedmen's Bureau in post-Civil War Reconstruction and the sort of concomitant pacification of the Philippines by the United States. And,
Mark, I have to stop you.
Yeah.
Have you read Thunder in the Mountains?
No.
Okay, so Brown, who was the head of, who ran the Freedmen Bureau, you know, they send him to West because he fucked up so bad. They're like, go kill some Indians out in Oregon and shit like that. Then he gets in this like fucking epic chase with this the band of Joseph that were, you know, in you know Joseph. You've been here longer than I have. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to like. Anyways, just a fantastic American epic that is connected to Reconstruction in a very bizarre way, but has a giant history of our own state in it. Yeah. Sorry for that. This interruption.
No, that's good.
Please.
I'll check it out.
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah,
just that you know, in that circumstance, they're informing each other, right? There's no just grab the book. So this is like language from Senator Albert Beveridge, an infamous 1900 statement on the floor of Congress that the common people of the Philippines, this is from White Reconstruction from Dylan Rodriguez. The common people of the Philippines and their stupidity are like their caribou bulls. They're incurably indolent. They're like children playing at men's work. Such a clinical and metaphorical associations of Filipinos with childhood, adolescence, beasts of burden and disease, a racial colonial grammar that presumes and anticipates the innate maturity and healthfulness of the white subject, suggests a racial necessity of the cultural civil society building work of Americanization, as well as the compulsory pedagogical form of the US colonialist nation building regime in the aftermath of the US conquest. And I'm thinking about it because of this part that you just read, James, where from a theoretical and political viewpoint, the fundamental question is under what conditions such degradation was possible and what social forces promoted it or were complicitous with it. This is just a you know, a U.S. Army or U.S. military apparatus that has been that has got all of its education inside of a country that has just finished breaking up the project of Reconstruction and goes to the Philippines in the aftermath of the Spanish-American War and does the exact same kinds of things there.
right.
Without any sort of like, without anybody saying, you know, that thing we did to the blacks back home, let's do that here.
Yeah. We ought to export this technology over here, sir.
Right.
It's like, yeah,
Right. Very much like actors without an ideology or without an ideology known to them.
right. Yeah.
That's the best kind.
Yeah. I mean, Jacques said it gets worse when you notice it.
Yeah, it just made me
yeah.
think of, you know, this creation of roles for women, prescribed roles. And
Yeah,
again, that kind of emphasis on the family.
let me say what makes me what scares me about that idea. Okay, it's that 1619 project stuff. Like once you say it's like, don't worry guys, I'm not Charles Mill. I'm a good old Marxist, sir. I tell you the truth, you know. And then there's like, yeah, what happened here? It's like, Well, you see the ideology that was in America that was compelling the deconstructions of Reconstruction. Of course, it is embedded in the state's military apparatus, which then travels with it everywhere it goes. Thus, you recreate such situations in Cambodia and stuff. And actually, we know that that is partially true. Without explicit ideological articulation, or like seeing it as vice versa, right? Like, I'm gonna go civilize these motherfuckers, I'm gonna go bring Jesus to them. Actually, I want their shit, I don't care if they're dead, whatever. All these things can exist together. But what sometimes when we talk about ideology, I feel like we are being like secret neo-Kantians. So, or we're talking about categories and concepts, but what we are really talking about is this external coercion, like something external to the system. But yes, but when Mark like talks to me, or James talks to me, he doesn't have to like always explain that, look, the ideology is there because this
It's
material
the
is
explanation
presuppositions.
or the kind of
Yeah.
it's not the driving cause.
Yeah, I guess.
That's like Marx's contention, one of his base contentions.
I mean, always. I mean,
But that's flipping Hegel on his. That's the flipping Hegel on his head.
Exactly. The point is to change, not to interpret the world. I mean, he's constantly doing that. His method in Grundrisa is to go from abstract to concrete. But
it's really hard to talk about. Well, there were certain factors in production changed, and the cost of linen went up, so people went somewhere and did this thing. When it's much easier to speak of, they believed they were converting the savages, so they brought them civilization.
right, like yeah, I just want to be mindful of that.
Examples I think of this is we have this ahistorical way often that we talk about germ warfare, biowarfare, with respect to indigenous populations of the Americas, where the first instances of European plagues and diseases are, by all historical knowledge, accidents that feed into this like supremacist ideology that the people are bringing with them.
Yeah.
And later become active weapons of war, in smallpox blankets or whatever. They're both true, but when we forget the gulf of 200 years between those events,
right,
we end up with a very bad understanding of history.
Yeah.
That is actually worse. It's not just worse because it's wrong, because honestly, I don't care if it's wrong. It's worse because it stops us from being able to actually contend with the problem, which is the utter brutalism of colonialism. It couldn't give a fuck that it killed 70, 80, 90% of a population. That doesn't fucking matter. We'll just import them from somewhere else by force and create a new industry out of it. Right? Sure. Like, that's the larger, more important critique than whether or not a new weapon of war was deployed and how horrific that particular weapon of war was.
Yeah.
They were going to prosecute that war by other means. And it's important. It is important in the Sioux Wars to talk about the importance of bioweapons, because the US military was getting its ass kicked for a long fucking time. The bioweapons and murdering all the buffalo were what won that war, So like, it's relevant there, but it's not relevant strictly as a technology. That's sort of an appeal to horror that stops us from being able to think about it or something,
Yeah. No, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, I see a lot of people read this book. Actually, the person who suggested that I read this book is, they came from it from a critical background. They just picked it up, but then it's easy, I feel like, to make suggestions that, you know, oh, that like whiteness has an external and real existence which compels history. And again, I don't give a shit about like if a trans person is real or if, you know, blackness is, like, I just won my political goals. You know, I've moved on from like debate, bro. Like, I just don't care. But here's what I do care. When those types of beliefs interfere with your political work, which is exactly what you were saying in a different sense, because if you say that sexism or patriarchy is supra-historical, if you read this book and come up with that conception, I know that's not Federici's aim here, nor is it her responsibility to explain more than she's doing by posting all this history. But if when those beliefs have crystallized in people's head, that, oh, this thing is inevitable, then that leads to nihilism. Because like if there is this, like, you know, sexist spirit that guides the world, I mean, you can't do anything about it, right? Because at the end of the, so you get I just like want to, you know, always be mindful to kind of point those distinctions out.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think there's, I don't remember where in the book it is, but there's this example that she brings up during the sort of period of the witch hunts of one village, one time, where the Inquisition comes in, and I don't know if it's literally the Inquisition, but, you know, one of the extensions of the witch hunts comes in and starts putting the whole town to task while the men who are out for their fishing season. And the men come back and they stand in solidarity, and that town doesn't have a large witch burning. Right. I think that's one of the most important examples in here, because I think what she's trying to say fundamentally is that that misogyny and patriarchy at large are anti-solidarity. Like, that's all they really boil down to, is this consistent, repeated choice to not stand in solidarity with women. That is an active decision that's being made. It's not something that we're being like compelled by the ghost of the past or something to do. We don't have to. We can choose to break that decision, and we're the only ones that really have the ability to make that decision.
Yeah. Well, I guess James doesn't agree.
No, I'm just
Fine, James. People don't have volitions. Ghosts are real.
all right, but I support women, but I'll take the ghosts are real, whatever, sure. Accuse me of that. I don't care.
Should we go to patriarchy of the wage, because we're so excited to get there? I can't, no, please don't do this.
Yeah,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
for that last section, she just kind of claims that women become the commons, the new
Right.
commons.
Yeah.
It's a short section.
Once women's activities were defined as non-work, women's labor began to appear as a natural resource, available to all, no less than the air we breathe or the water we drink. Right. And this is where, I mean, that's directly pointed at Marx for sure.
Yeah, considering that the thing I read before.
Right.
About it being a natural increase.
Yeah,
Population.
women as the commons. Yeah, so then kind of in the patriarchy of the wage, I have this formula. It says that I've written down here. It says, if work is not labor, then there is no wage. And if work is labor, then wage goes to husband. Because, as we've said over and over again, women's and we should probably read this section when she's citing the what was it, the sexual contract. Yeah, okay, there is a clear, concrete difference between the social contracts of men and social contracts of women. That concreteness is, of course, realized in its kind of most bright expression in the realm of exchange, which is in creation of value through labor. And I've written here that she's going here from absolute, whatever. I have another one here about, does anybody have anything else to say about that before we get into that absolute and relative surplus?
Well, I'll read right before the page before that. She, in the paragraph that said on 98 paragraph starts this policy. She kind of defines patriarchy of the wage. It is in this sense I speak of the patriarchy of the wage. We must rethink the concept of wage slavery. If it is true that male workers became only formally free under the new wage labor regime, the group of workers who in the transition to capitalism most approached the condition of slaves was working class women.
Okay.
Right, because of things like you said, that it was impossible for women to have money
Yeah.
and to own property, subjected to men and labor appropriated by them.
Yeah. And here she says, even in times of population decline, cottage workers apparently continued to multiply. Their families were so large that a contemporary 17th century Austrian, looking at those living in his village, described them as packed in their homes like sparrows on a rafter. What stands out in this type of arrangement is that though the wife works side by side with her husband, she too producing for the market, it was the husband who now received her wage. And this cottage industries happened to in the rural area. And this was also true for other female workers. Once they married, then she goes on to kind of express the same arrangement in England. Yeah. I don't have any more. I mean, I do have this note about, I guess, the absolute surplus to relative surplus. I just don't know why I wrote this down. It says more working hours, lesser wages, then lead to less work for more wages over intensification of work. I have no idea. Must have not been that important.
Well, what she means is like it starts out where they're trying to squeeze the maximum out of the worker, but we talked about this before. They have to kind of ease down to get more productivity out of the worker.
Yeah.
Not just draining them and killing them off the first day. It's compensated by that.
This is alive and well today, right? This is the 5-hour workday, right? This is still like trying to get more relative surplus out.
Right.
Yeah, and she's saying it's founded on this that exclusion of women from the wage. That enabled them to have more Marx, the classic Marx version of reproduction of the worker, because you're using this unpaid labor from the housewife.
Right.
Yeah, and I guess she's saying that, and this contract is between the man and the capitalist. So it's not like, hey, maybe I should have changed my earlier formula, that it's not two people that are now making unequal contracts of adhesion or whatever, it's one person that is making a choice for two, which is an important distinction, which means that the woman doesn't have, like, she's legalized. She entered this arrangement as a legal subject, as we saw earlier, through penal codes, but she's not a full legal subject as to be able to make separate contracts, which is actually what capitalism will later on has to account for. I'm interested to see how that develops in this book, but that's what's going on right now. Yeah. Yeah, I don't have anything else until Taming of Women and the redefinition of family and masculinity.
Yeah, I mean, I do think, I guess I'm not sure how to expand on this, but I think this is one of the more immediately relevant parts to our regular life, is the ways in which work still takes this form. So I guess I always want to expand on this, but I don't really know how to in the framework of this book.
Oh, we can, if you want to talk about like how surplus capital is made and stuff, we can, yeah, I'll do that all day.
Let's get late for that. Well, I was just thinking of, you look at sitcoms, or, I mean, I was watching The Simpsons, and, Homer works, Marge is at home, and most of the stories about her are dominated by how, like, she's either really excited about vacuuming, or that she could have gone to college, so now, instead of, like, maybe in the 50s they would have, like, glamorized that family unit. Now it's kind of even like a sarcastic take on it, but it's still, promoting it in some way.
I think even
Yeah.
even in this sort of like the workforce in which men and women are participating equally, and folks in between, I think that the sort of contemporary formations of the labor market are in line with saying, I don't care who you are, what you look like, you can have any job you want, basically, as long as you do the work of, like, self-subjugation and policing your coworker, right? There's like it's like
you can have any 3 jobs you want nowadays.
sure, yeah, absolutely right. Well, you get 18 hours in each job and no benefits, we'll make sure that we well, you'll have that one job that you get some benefits from, that even though the job sucks, you won't leave because you can't lose the benefits on it. There's like this sort of, everyone has to create their own complex life system. Everyone has to create this giant hustle for themselves in order to make it, but that's seen as success and freedom. And I guess still don't know how to expand on it though. I mean, the generic form would be to flip the conversation about how, if minimum wage were keeping pace with productivity, minimum wage would be $22 an hour or whatever, would be to flip that around and say that's the point. Like, maintaining a certain amount of minimum wage, where it's like the minimum wage increases but slower than the productivity does. That's the point. Rather than a rigorous commitment like a libertarian would have to literally having no minimum wage. It's like having a commitment to a minimum wage that itself is a weapon of control. Because you can always be threatened with it.
I mean,
because if the libertarians are right, just imagine this. It's
Yeah.
the libertarian, like the workers would not work at the places that were paying the really low wages and go with ones with the highest ones. So the overall wage would go up on average if they were right. But as you're saying, like that we have a minimum wage, even though it's lower than living wage, it kind of stifles protest against it. Because what are you arguing about? We won the minimum wage, but
Mhm.
complaining, get a second or third job.
Right.
Yeah, but I mean, then I guess then the question is like, what is the minimum wage mechanism? I mean, is that like part of the problem? I mean, I guess part of the point would be to secure that circulation, because I don't think like you could have, I mean, you could not have a minimum wage and still have capitalism. But I wonder if the consumer society requires that.
Sure. Yeah. I
That's
mean,
the
that's how
Well,
you
does
create a
capitalism
new market
require a consumer
inside.
society?
Sorry, go ahead, James.
Yeah, I was just going to ask if does capitalism require a consumer society?
Well, I'm
Because it's
thinking
getting
about
back to what you were
like the
saying about
Ford Revolution, right? I mean, the point is like, yeah, you come work here, but I also want you to have my car for your family.
Well, it's because
Which means
Ford was a believer in the factory town. He just in the vertically integrated, you know, industry.
yeah, yeah.
You know,
But go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say with Ford is that like, isn't that a function of also a necessary part of capitalism?
I mean, it doesn't have to be, but I think in order to get a relative surplus, yes, because capitalism is, you know, is non-zero sum. It's like generating wealth because the wealth circulates.
Yeah.
That's his whole like claim, right?
Yep.
And so the more you can circulate it, even if you circulate it, you know, I mean, like the minimum wage, one could argue, I think, correctly within capitalism, that a minimum wage that allows people who actually circulate money, i.e., the poor and working class, to have more consumable income would make people wealthier. I think plenty of people do make this argument, and it's sort of like the
Yeah, but not wealthy to a point of being able to save.
right.
I mean, yeah.
You know, maybe like there's some value in market stability that might offset. So you could talk about people having 3 months of rent or something like that as some form of minimum wage, because maybe the market instability is payoff or something like that. But yeah, it's not. No one should ever be able to. Hopefully, no one should ever be able to retire. Would be the goal in that system from the capitalist perspective, right?
Yeah, which is achieved. And you know what, kind of what's prompting all this is like, I remember, and I think this was Corey Robbins is The Conservative Mind or something. But I remember there's a discussions of early Edmund Burke, and he's talking about young Edmund Burke, and he's writing about UBI, right? And what the author is trying to say is that, oh, this ideas of minimum income are actually conservative ideas, and the reason of it was that because, you know, we have to realize that the French Revolution didn't start as a bourgeois revolution. It wasn't Robespierre and, you know, Honest Abe or whatever these fucking guys' names were. It was 2 or 3 peasants revolts before that, right? Or possibly more. And yeah, so Corey Robbins is like, oh, there was like early mercantiles were very much concerned about the peace and order, in order for this system to function, and then low payment was kind of an evolution off of that. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just still like not too
Yeah.
sold that it's necessary. I mean, yeah, we see it in other places with less.
Well, I that there's other places, there's a differential. There's, because I think there's two factors. There's what she's saying. Marx was saying that it increases the productivity of the worker, but also it does create the consumer society, a market to buy the goods that the workers who don't have a minimum wage are making in, you know, a developing country, that the people who have minimum wage can buy the cheap goods over and over, kind of helping that circulation go around.
Yeah.
There's also a small, a small as in like very few generation cycle, 3-4 generation cycle or something like that of these, of this neo-colonialist kind of notion of, you know, exporting labor to Taiwan, Thailand, Mozambique, wherever, of having the laborer there who can't afford the goods they're making. And then the moment they're starting to, that influx of money that is relatively large compared to the local economy, the moment that would threaten to raise people into a higher class status,
Yeah.
they respond by demanding, you know, basic things like worker safety or higher wages or some measure of like long-term security.
Yeah.
And that precipitates these companies from evacuating that place onto a new place, and the resulting, like, you know, like a lot of these times, or a lot of these places, they are company towns in effect, because, you know, 70% of the local economy is one business or something like that. So that business leaves and the local economy totally collapses. And by the time this company makes its rounds through 4 different countries, it can come back to this place because the economy has reset to the dire state it was at before they left. You know, and so there's like this eternal like periphery that's in a form of motion, and that periphery is in, you know, some form of extremely low wage labor to support a capitalist core.
Yeah, and thankfully Marx theorized that, right? I mean, that's the standing army of, right, that of the unemployed that is always on the periphery. But I just, you know, your intuitions tell you that, well, you know, it's not really infinite, right? It's human source, but then you recognize that, oh, you can use borders to use this the way you would manage cattle, right? Like you're saying, you shift, you let this breed, you harvest this, you let that.
Like a fallow field.
Yeah, exactly. And this is happening simultaneously to this other effect of capitalism, which always creating these contradictions. And the very point, and you know, Zizek kind of was talking about this. He was saying that that the uprising is the uprising always needs the condition for an uprising. Uprisings don't come out of desperations or societies that have been pummeled, right? Like the French occupation and or North Korea, places like that. It needs that condition of freedom that actually capitalism make, right? I mean, it does unfether you to some degree. I mean, right? And you become a legal subject, or you get to aggregate certain rights. Of course, those are never communal rights. They actually put you aversely against everybody you know. So the conditions of coming together are very difficult to overcome.
But
Yeah,
I
but
don't
those
see
things.
that. I mean, you can. It's, I don't know. I think it depends on how you look at it. That freedom, but without the solidarity, you need that too. Like, so if you're getting this freedom piece without that, that would make revolution very difficult, if not impossible.
Yeah, but we need. No. Of course, I just think that it's very important to even if you rock the words like wage slavery to show that this is not feudalism, like this is capitalism. Under capitalism, it's not feudalism. It's a different form of oppression. It's very particular, and
Yeah.
and it has weird. Yeah.
I think Federici. I mean, I think that's something she's pushing back on. You know, we talked about this.
Yeah, I can definitely.
Marxist take.
Yeah.
Revolution was possible, or maybe not revolution was possible, but there were struggles. There was a lot of class conflict.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure how unique it is to.
Hesitate to say capitalism gave us any benefits. Oh, sorry.
What was that, James?
I was also pointing out that we also read that she's hesitant to make that argument that Marx made, that like capitalism was bad, but it gave us all these things. She wants to kind of say it was bad, or like more emphasize the badness of it.
Yeah.
Definitely seeing a continuity between, say, the notion of people in late manorialism living in the King's Forest illegally, and then something like Fanon's framework of the city folk and the country folk, talking about how the in the process of colonization, speaking in the context of Algeria, but in the process of colonization, you can't break a country totally, or you get nothing out of it.
Yeah.
You have to leave these like retrograde, quote unquote, sort of like escape valves for people to leave the city, because that's a form of like self-regulation, right? That someone leaves and you can call them a criminal as soon as they leave, which keeps other people in place working, while also making it so that you don't have to like find, contain, and go through the like labor practice of trying to like discipline this person. But it also creates the condition where the countryside is where the uprising can take root. Those people that escape those people that escape out there, and they learn, they come back in touch with their humanity, and they have a stable life world around them that allows them to like create, plan, and execute a revolution. And he's speaking from the context of someone who went through it. So I don't know. I think that there's probably some way in which this is a permanent function of power, no matter what the shape of power is, whether that's feudal or capitalistic or whatever, that you always have some periphery that's uncolonized. And that's always both an escape valve because of sort of marginal gains problem of you can't pursue your enemies to the end of the earth. Eventually you're putting out more than you're getting back from that process. And then also it serves valuable functions, and eventually on long enough time frame it becomes the seeds of one's undoing. Just like having a black market in every, like, in all of the old European cities, having a black market was a vital way in which the royal family was able to survive in case the town became under siege. The black market was, those are the people who knew how to smuggle stuff in and out. They were the people that would save your life. They also might kidnap you and hold you for ransom. So, you know, to make sure you can pay that ransom.
Yeah.
It made me think of, this is kind of related, but and maybe an internal release valve of the same way, like punk or other alternative music scenes as ways of doing the same with people who don't quite fit in, and you can call them criminals. And with punk and political music, you have, you know, they get to yell about war and all this stuff, and really just do nothing and be kind of managed in their own way.
Sure.
But I do like the idea that that's where the seeds of the revolution can blossom, you know, ideally. A large swaths of it, though, are, you know, totally corporatized and capitalized. So, well, hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, look, so I mean that's great. You know, you give the materialist description of it, and you account for the psychologicalism, right? Like how they're manifesting as thoughts and stuff. But you know, like there is always the ontological underneath. I mean, as long as you're talking in this Marxist sense, because there is also a theoretical necessity, right? So what do I mean by that? Because I want to make the claim that against, no, it's not all bad. Like capitalism has, I mean, these value judgments are weird, but I'll explain them as I go along. But there is good sides. So one of them is, of course, in its inception, like by creating the conditions of exchange for property, which then developed into the superstructures of property laws and property bearing subjects. And then some part of it is, for example, this primitive accumulation, right? But then it disturbs those feudal arrangements. Like it's like whatever they were. I mean, they could not have gone for longer. I just say that, and it's in that that move then becomes the core that makes that antagonism, because there are two interests, right? I like my life, I want your land, right? And then that brings it in, but then some of those subjects are again coming in, and then they are again having those antagonisms, but those antagonisms come because, and this is very Enlightenment, there's new phenomena that have the old seeds of the past, but it, like our psychology is now in a new domain, right? And that is because those antagonism have kind of brought us to this higher stage so I don't know. I think that is good. I mean the fact that I mean, it's not a meaningful assertion, though. Yeah.
I'm thinking about, you know, the idea of capitalism wiping away all the old traditions and ways, and we could kind of choose new great ones. But from this, a lot of, you know, of the kind of more oppressive traditions and things are wiping away were seem to be created at the same time as this transition to capitalism. So it brought about all these kind of oppressive domination of women from like the church and things like that. So I don't know where that fits.
Yeah,
into,
no,
but
at the end I was evaluating what I was gonna like conclude with, and I was like, look, like a changing world, saying a changing world is better than a world without dialectics when nothing changes is a meaningless assertion. So I understand there were sentiments within me to make that expression, but they don't stand on anything. So yeah, maybe it's all bad.
Well, I don't. I mean,
Oh,
what's
good.
interesting
Cost is
of a
very high.
dialectic of this kind of solidarity of the communes with the individual freedom of capitalism to something that combines the best aspects of both.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm inclined to think that the cost is very high when we look at like the loss of language diversity and biodiversity. I don't know, like diversities in general.
Yeah.
That's a staple of this transition. To maybe not necessarily unique to capitalism. It might have been the case that any sort of like large scale transition to a new form of power was going to result in the loss of diversities as everything became a battleground.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
But I think that there ought to have been ways to not have had to destroy people, lives, cultures, languages, species, in order to to make whatever theoretical improvements capitalism had.
Yeah. Look, this is beginning to resemble my weekend fights with my mom about Iran, right? I mean, there is because me as a post-revolution, 3 years after revolution had concluded, way into the Iran-Iraq war. That's where I was born, so I can have that distance. That the revolution
Sure.
like brought the most garbage, kind of Muslims you could dream up, and
Mhm.
made him, helped them run a country who killed all the great people,
Mhm.
including all the socialists, whatever. The purges of 1980s happened, hundreds of thousands of people, right in Tehran, close to my house. But like I always, and my mom, she lived through it. Blah 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 blah. But I'm always like, look, mom, there is a beauty in all of this, and that is that for the first time in history, one of the first nations of the late 20th century that had a religious revival, a revolution that overthrew a monarchy, and in a not so bloody way, like in the beginnings, but of course it got horrible. But and that in itself, like, made my generation know that two things, right? That change is possible, that a fucking country can totally change, right?
Mhm.
Go from a monarchy to an Islamic republic, whatever
Mhm.
fuck that is, which is all made up.
Mhm.
And that you become immediately responsible for this change, that it can be incredibly horrible, incredibly bad. Now, there are aspects of capitalism you can't stretch these two analogies together. Like, capitalism is not a phenomenon, right? Like, it's real material, because of revolution, they're like the kids of the Ayatollah Khomeini are very happy, right? But capitalism is not like that. Like, there's actual real conditions of expropriation that you can support, but morally repugnant, whatever. And so I cannot say that you can look at it whole thing good way, but I can see that because it's creating conditions of change,
Mhm.
and every epoch, of course, does that in Marxist conception of history. Like, that really excites me.
Mhm.
But maybe that's just like an aspirations of an incredibly bored person, right?
No, I accept that, but as long as you recognize that the benefits are kind of meted out to certain, given to certain groups over others, and even this kind of process of wiping away like all these old traditions, like Mark was noting, like falls on um, more marginalized communities and animals before it, but and
Yeah.
Christianity is also fading away, but just a lot more slowly. It still is.
No, but what about the working class? Like the working class can now like express itself on guitar or make a movie or write a novel, with
Is the class doing it, or are people doing it?
I mean, I'm just like I'm looking at like the depravity of TikTok, and I'm very happy that now everybody gets to now in a very shitty
But yeah, I think in a Marxist sense,
confines, but they still get to experience that part of themselves, which is not possible.
that's great. But I think a Marxist sense would be like, to what end? Are they acting as a class? If not, they're just a bunch of individuals doing things that are, aesthetically
Yeah.
beautiful.
What is that show? The Black Gate or something? What is that like dystopian?
Oh, Black Mirror.
I mean, yeah. Yeah. To what end? To Black Mirror. RoboCop. First one.
Yeah. Yeah. The
I
Matrix.
mean, I think that they're, it's speculative. Well,
Yeah.
two things actually. One is that I want to say, like, there is a concession that I value in capitalism, and that's the sort of like quote unquote right to an education that I think is largely a result of capitalism falling under its own weight, that like it has to give away some of the things that were previously reserved for the ruling class. But it is something that has seemingly arisen out of capitalism, and I think that the ability to learn a guitar is part of that, and to have a TikTok channel. I'm inclined to think that if Federici's account is correct of the power of the revolutions that existed, the page one claim, capitalism is the counter revolution. That we could have had TikTok a couple hundred years ago,
No,
And they worked less than us. They worked less hours, so they had plenty of time to do guitar.
Yeah, it might have been carrier pigeon TikTok. It didn't mean TikTok.
But yeah, with the technology, as Marx writes, is a product of capital competition and expansion.
Yeah.
Same with education. They have to teach as the technology gets more advanced, the machines get more advanced. The workers need to be a little more advanced to learn more.
Yeah. Which makes us, dream up. But yeah, maybe who again. I'm like tonight. I'm just talking about these kind of value judgments that are just like fucking emotivism. I don't know. So yeah. So should we? Are you guys good? I think we can finish it or done.
You're right.
We good?
Yeah, I'm good, I think.
Okay. Jeez. All right.
Right.
How much we got left? We got.
Well,
I have 1 page of notes. That's why I was so optimistic.
okay.
Yeah, we have about as much left in this chapter as we've done today. So
it'll take a couple more days. We get slower.
Oh, okay.
Like Zeno, right? We'll go half.
Oh.
Zeno's arrow never hits the mark.
The book that never finished. Yeah.
That's going to be really difficult when we're trying to utter part of a word. And then part of a
phoneme.
Everybody's like stuck on the.
Do you have anything to say about E? Not really.
It's like just Tim and Eric show. Yeah. Oh, all right. I'm gonna stop this, but I'm not gonna close this.
I have a plug for my speculative fiction corner. It's related to something. I was going to plug something else, but
No,
I didn't
plug,
want to do another Mars
please.
book. It's part of the Red Mars trilogy. It's the second one. I picked this one tonight. I was going to do another one, but I picked this one because you were talking about the Soviets and kind of nation building and creating this new system of laws. That's what they're doing in this book.
Oh, awesome.
In the first book, there was kind of a colonization of Mars, and then like the revolution happens, and this is where they're getting into like, oh, politics is boring now. Some of the characters like one of the characters is a revolutionary now is like, I'm just gonna wander the planet in a blimp and fly around because I don't want to sit in these committees and councils and things like that. And the whole planet is just working out how to work all these kind of spheres together. People coming in, immigrating from Earth, which is going through its kind of economic and ecological crises, and dealing with terraforming the planet and people disagreeing about terraforming the planet. It's just, there's a lot in there.
Awesome. That's
Nice.
pretty cool.
And a lot of geology too that you have to know.
The Red Mars and Blue Moon. Read
Red
these books.
No, it's Red Mars, Blue Mars, Green Mars.
Oh, okay.
He has another one called Red Moon that I haven't read. That
Only assume that Green Mars is when they start doing the green imperialism section. But,
Damn. So they're good. Am I investing myself in these, James? Because I've seen this dude talk on a bunch of socialists.
Yeah, he's a comrade, and this is some of his early stuff. It's not his politics. Probably aren't as polished now. Like he's wasn't there's. It's socialist, and I think it's there, but I think this is when he's starting to become like kind of more of a social science writer, but also doing like the hard science, like physics.
Nice.
I'd recommend it.
Awesome.
Picture that I have up is drawn partly in response to the book that we're reading. So wanted to share it with anybody who's still watching this far into the video. The artist is K. Fred Rouse. So
Awesome. And maybe I've got a couple of, well, what do I want to show? Yeah, I got, there's Soviet Legal Philosophy by Bob Hazard. This is pretty cool. It's kind of a good primer and kind of original text that he's put together. He himself was in University of Moscow when Pashkunis, this guy that I'm writing, was teaching there, grade 1. Then there is Revolution in Law, which is Soviet law development from 1917 till 1938. And the last one is Soviet Legal Theory, Schlesinger or whatever this fucking guy's name is, German.
Schlesinger.
Schlesinger.
It was like a
Schlesinger.
hermeneutics, right?
Huh?
Hermeneutics related.
Mhm.
I read about him in relation to
Yeah, this is pretty cool. It's very exciting. I think for people who are interested in Marxism and socialism, I feel like, especially in America, when we do these kind of talks, we're usually talking about culture issues, right? And I think it's about time that we get more comfortable talking about real technical works of leftist work, right? Like you're in the world, you're doing something, and it's important to there's, you do your reading Marx and you do the 4-hour wonderful conversation with your friends, but in today's world, you need to have your skills out there, and it's good to know how these things work. And the logic of them are usually either economics or law, right? I mean, in kind of variety of way, and just like don't be scared of these things. Like technical knowledge, right? Like we need people that go to zoning meetings. You know, we need people that pay attention to who gets the bid to pick up the garbage in your neighborhood, and you need to know how these things work. And I really encourage you to do that. But on top of that, and I'm being very, very pushy here, it's good to see other people try it. It doesn't matter if they failed, but other modalities, right? For example, Mark was talking about we could have had Instagram or TikTok 100 years ago. Go read about the advents of internet in South America, especially during the Allende's brief stint. Yeah, just read about people who started things anew, or started, be it fascism or mass murder or communism, whatever it is, and just like get inspired by it, because there are regular people that were just like, what if we do things not this way? I don't know. So that's what I would suggest. Okay, anything else, everybody? All right.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
I'm just